Tampa sits at a very peculiar kind of boundary. When you think of a city at the edge of the world, your mind naturally drifts toward dramatic geographic violence, shattering cliffs, freezing winds, and immense gray waves crashing against jagged black rocks. But the perimeter of Tampa is much quieter, much more deliberate than that. It is a place where the massive open expanse of the Gulf of Mexico slowly exhales its energy into the shallow basin of Tampa Bay. On one side of this equation, you have the raw, untamed wealth of the Gulf. On the immediate other, you find Ybor City, a dense neighborhood unlike absolutely anything else in the American experiment. Welcome to the Origin Archive. Let us decode this culinary tapestry together. The king of the shacks, the real grouper standard. Long before Tampa ever possessed a modern skyline of glass and steel, it possessed a formidable fleet of wooden fishing boats. The productive waters of the Gulf of Mexico sit just off the immediate coast, and for multiple generations, the complex marine environments around Tampa Bay have rated as some of the most highly lucrative commercial fishing grounds on the entire eastern seaboard. Among the hundreds of species pulled from these warm depths, the red grouper is the singular catch that defines the culinary soul of the region. Grouper is a magnificent fish, firm, remarkably mild, clean, white-fleshed, and structurally built to withstand the intense heat of an open grill, the violent bubbling of a commercial deep fryer, or a heavy, uncompromising hand of dark blackening spice. The secret handshake, smoked mullet dip. If the celebrated grouper sandwich represents Tampa Bay's public-facing, tourist-friendly seafood identity, then smoked mullet dip is the community's absolute secret handshake. The striped mullet is a fish that receives absolutely zero respect throughout the vast majority of North America. It is an incredibly oily fish. It carries a remarkably strong, robust flavor profile, and it spends its life feeding directly near the muddy surface of coastal estuaries. For those exact scientific reasons, however, it has served as an indispensable dietary staple of local Gulf Coast fishing communities for well over 100 years. The salami compromise, the true architecture of the Cuban Miami, has a Cuban sandwich, but Tampa has the Cuban sandwich. The linguistic distinction between those two articles matters immensely down here, and any born and raised Tampan will gladly explain the historical gravity of that difference to you at great passionate length. The authentic Tampa Cuban sandwich was fundamentally engineered in Ybor City during the late 1800s. It was structurally built to serve as the ultimate fuel for the thousands of cigar factory workers who required a lunch that was incredibly fast, highly affordable, and profoundly filling. The Anquilao, street fuel of the cigar boom. In the hyper-accelerated atmosphere of the early 1900s, Ybor City ran entirely on the economics of fine cigars and massive foot traffic. The monolithic brick factories employed tens of thousands of skilled workers simultaneously. When the factory whistles blew for mandatory break times, an army of mobile street vendors moved rapidly through the crowded, unpaved avenues, selling fresh food directly by hand. The structural requirements for these items were absolute. The food had to be incredibly fast, dirt cheap, and entirely portable. 5 generations of comfort. Spanish Bean Soup, Florida's oldest continuously operating restaurant, opened its doors in Tampa's Ybor City in the year 1905. The legendary Columbia restaurant was originally founded by a visionary Cuban immigrant named Casimiro Hernandez, Sr., and in an extraordinary feat of cultural endurance, it has been owned and operated by the exact same family for 5 consecutive generations. In those volatile early years of the 20th century, Hernandez was cooking primarily for a displaced community of immigrant laborers who were living thousands of miles away from their ancestral homes. Pan con lechon. The democratization of the feast before the pressed Cuban sandwich rose to completely dominate Tampa's signature lunch scene. There was an older, far more rustic staple known simply as pan con lechon. The literal translation of the phrase is incredibly direct. Bread with roasted pork. The stark, unadorned simplicity of that description is precisely where the beauty of the dish lies. To create the filling, a whole intact pig is heavily marinated in mojo, a vibrant, acidic concoction of sour Seville oranges, immense amounts of crushed garlic, cumin, oregano, and pure olive oil. The animal is then slow roasted over low heat for a period of many hours until the exterior skin lacquers into a glass-like crackling, and the interior meat completely surrenders, pulling apart easily into long, incredibly soft, juicy strands. Boliche. The engineering of the Sunday table for generations. Sunday afternoon in Ybor City used to smell overwhelmingly of boliche. At its most basic level, boliche is often described to outsiders as a Cuban-style pot roast, but that simple description thoroughly understates the intense culinary engineering required to produce it. The dish begins with a whole massive eye round of beef. The cook utilizes a long, sharp knife to literally core a deep tunnel entirely through the center of the dense muscle. This architectural cavity is then tightly packed and stuffed with a seasoned mixture of highly spiced Spanish chorizo sausage, minced garlic, and diced onions. Carne con papa, the quiet weeknight anchor. If the complex preparation of boliche represented the celebration of Sunday dinner, then carne con papa was the undisputed utility player of Tuesday night. The literal translation of the name is as direct as human language allows: beef with potatoes. It is a traditional Cuban stew that relies entirely on humble, accessible ingredients. Tough chunks of chuck or stewing beef are cubed and aggressively browned in a hot pot, then slowly simmered alongside large chunks of potato, crushed tomatoes, onions, green bell peppers, garlic, heavy pinches of earthy cumin, and dried bay leaves until everything softens down into a rich, deeply comforting red broth. Pastelito de guayaba. The shattered sweet punctuation. Every distinct food culture on Earth requires a specific pastry to function as a final definitive piece of punctuation. In the historic bakeries of Ybor City, that punctuation is the iconic pastelito de guayaba. This delicate creation consists of immensely flaky, multi-layered puff pastry dough folded precisely around a thick, dense ribbon of rich, tropical guava paste. Sometimes, depending on the bakery's specific heritage, it is paired with a layer of tart cream cheese, but it is always baked at a high temperature until the external pastry completely shatters upon contact, and the sweet fruit filling beautifully caramelizes at the exposed edges. It is sweet, floral, slightly tart, and completely gone in 2 or 3 rich bites. It represents more than 100 years of immigrant history, cultural adaptation, and culinary survival, folded beautifully into a handful of crispy pastry dough. That is the true, unfiltered essence of Tampa. Stay curious, keep digging into the roots of what you eat, and never forget that history is always alive at the table.